Welcome back. You're watching Stock Watch this week, and joining me to unpack your stock-related questions this afternoon is Ricus Reeders from PSG Hole-in-One Ruimsig. Start sending us your questions via email to stockwatch@bdtv.co.za or via SMS on 41392 or on X at Business Day TV using the hashtag StockWatch. Thank you so much for your time, Ricus. Really appreciate it. Let's actually start off with, just what stood out for you in terms of trading this week. It seemed to be quite a volatile week. Markets not really settled on one direction. Even the US markets, we know that they usually, like in 1 week, they'll post all these gains, but even they seem to have quite a mixed picture this week. What did you make of that?
Well, I think one can divide it in two parts. The part prior to PPI announcement coming through yesterday and what's happened since.
Yeah, before and after PPI.
Yeah, well, that as far as I'm concerned was the main news event. But yeah, as far as the American market is concerned, it started off with Nvidia's giving a price decline, and that following through into the likes of things like Tesla, for example, where some of these the heavyweight technology stocks in America, after an amazing run since around about October last year, just had a bit of a drop, and that had a follow-through effect on market sentiment as well, I think. PPI yesterday came in higher than expected, and that together with the CPI numbers in the US last week, again changed sentiments towards rate cuts, the extent of rate cuts coming out of the US, when it's going to happen, and possibly just quieting down sentiment on future price movement in stocks. Although, looking at the way the Americans are growing GDP and inflation being persistently high, that's actually good news as to whether the prices specifically in the top 20%, 30% of market cap in the US is discounting too much good news is obviously the question. But I think fears of a recession are subsiding with every bit of news coming through. So at times, one just has to believe that good news is good news as far as the American markets are concerned. Our local markets are, except for the precious metals miners, which have had a good run with platinum going up a little bit, gold at a new high, that sector of the market has done well. But as for the rest, sentiment's still extraordinarily negative. Foreigners are still selling our market. And this is where bad news is bad news as well, as far as our whole economic environment is concerned. Plus, what's happening from government side, where it's ineptitude and inaction.
Yeah, indeed. Really quite interesting moves that we have seen over there. I think I'm still chuffed that the Rand is still below 19 Rand against the US dollar, now just above 18 Rand 60. So hopefully that momentum will carry on. But knowing the Rand, it might not last very long. You're talking about the precious metals, and I actually want to go into mining. There's a question here. I have a few mining companies in my portfolio and would really like the panel's opinion on Orion Metals. I have been watching the stock for months, and their earnings report came out on Wednesday. I think they did report on a narrower loss that they made in that period. And the viewer says, and my instincts only say buy. Should there be a big buy alert on Orion Metals at this point, Ricus, or not?
Okay, if Orion was a copper producing mine at the moment, I would say yes, because looking at what the copper price itself is doing, that's actually looking pretty good. But the fact is, Orion is still effectively an exploration company. Now, there's no doubt that the assets they've got, that they are exploring and developing, is substantial. I mean, it's from Prisco and there's. And, well, I've got a bit of historic background as to the area that they are operating in, and I can't see any problem with developing that as a mine, except it costs a lot of money to get there. And by the time you are producing, you don't know where the copper price is going to be. So at, everything else being staying the same, copper price where it is, rand where it is, cost being the same, it's a viable asset, but it's going to be volatile. So you can't really value it on income because there is none. It's difficult to say what the future income is going to be because it depends on what the copper price is going to be. But as far as the quality of the asset is concerned, or the potential asset is concerned, I've got no problem with that. So it's something that I would take a bet on. In other words, a small part of one's portfolio, and it might just turn out okay.
Yeah. And the second part of that question, do you agree on a 2 to 3 year hold if everything plays out right? But of course, you're saying that, lots of costs involved in exploration, it might be volatile. So you're not really sure if everything is going to play out right. But I mean, yeah, if everything stayed the same and things played out right, 2 3 year hold?
Yeah, and as long as you know that if things do go wrong, you're not going to have a substantial capital loss when measured against the rest of your investments.
Okay. All right. I get you there. Ricus, let's go to Standard Bank because that's one that's also just stumped a lot of people. Can you please enlighten on the drop of almost 6% on Standard Bank? Was almost 7% by the time the markets closed. Was this an overreaction or was it, what did you make of that?
Yeah, it's always difficult to explain these high volatility moves after a set of results because in the end, what one can say is that it was obviously good from an analysis point of view. I mean, the results, but from a market expectation, obviously not good enough, which is why it's dropped. So that just means that the run-up to the results were probably overdone. If I can add to that, market commentary seems to be, and it doesn't really differ from what other banks, for example, Absa has been saying that people are struggling to pay their debts. Yeah. So there's an increase in risk provision, and that possibly commentary from Standard Bank surrounding that also put a bit of a negative spin on the results itself. I don't think it's a long-term sell or anything like that. If you take a look at their return on equity, it's still fantastic. I think it's a very well-run bank. The African business did very well. Hopefully that will continue.
Yeah.
And obviously also their Chinese stake also adds a bit of diversification. So not too worried about the drop. It's just that if you bought 2 days ago, you're probably not smiling at the moment, but that's just the market.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, listen, and a lot of people have been propping Standard Bank up, even before you're right, that, so much was built up before these results. So now when they came, I think all of that there was a fizzling out on that front. But still a good buy. Would you say that if, at this point, looking at where the share price is, maybe this would be a good buying opportunity?
I would wait for the dust to settle. I think together with the other banks in the sector, longer term, it's probably okay to hold them. I've mentioned before, I'm not very fond of bank assets because they've got to recapitalize themselves every cycle. But at the moment, we are still sitting with a benign interest rate for them, at least, if not for the consumer. But there's possibly a slight lift in sentiment towards the negative side as people realize that, as I've said, people are under pressure, companies are under pressure to pay back their debts. So I wouldn't rush in to buy, but let's say it drops another 5-10%. Yeah, I mean, I think at that kind of level, it'll have good value again. But there's also no reason to sell if you're already in it.
Okay, all right, I hear you. Ricus, your thoughts on Transaction Capital and We Buy Cars? Quite a lot of people want to know, a lot about that, of course, as We Buy Cars has also set a date to list on the JSE. What do you make of those soon-to-be kind of two separately listed companies on the JSE?
Well, I think The interesting one is obviously We Buy Cars, because it's going to be a pretty unique type of company on the JSE. I was thinking we all know what they do. Or maybe we don't know what they do. They don't sell used cars. They are the conduit through which used cars are sold. So they almost a car broker. It's it's almost like secondhand aeroplanes, and it is more so in Transaction Capital's case, because what they've done is to unify, at least locally, to a large extent, what happens with a local car second-hand sale, because they've standardized it. You don't have to go to 5-10 different second-hand car salesmen to actually sell your car. Because of the technology that We Buy Cars use, you sort of know what you get. Car is that old, that's the price, that's what you got to pay for it. So compare them to Visa or MasterCard. They depend on how many transactions, how many cars are being sold. They take a small margin of that. I think it's a nice business model, and I think also quite defensive, because we all know what happens when your economy turns down. There's an increase in the sale of second-hand cars, so they could be quite defensive in that respect as well. Transaction Capital are left with assets which are highly risky, and I wouldn't really want to double in on that side of the business when that gets listed or when that remains.
Yeah, I hear you on that. And quite interestingly, the second-hand car market is now expanding, because we actually just had a conversation on the Business Lunch Show on the second-hand market in electric vehicles, Ricus. So pretty interesting things that we are seeing there on that front.
Yeah. See, it doesn't really depend on the prices of, what a second-hand car is worth. It depends on volume. If there's enough volume, it doesn't really matter what the price is. Of course it does, because the commission is based on price, but volume is far more important.
All right. Well, let's get to another question on Barloworld. Any particular reason behind the massive share price decline on Barloworld? That was yesterday, so I actually haven't checked on where the share is standing right now. It said, I don't see anything on SENS. Is this to do with the Russian exposure or just poor sentiment around SA heavy industrials? Could this be a value play? Yeah, I mean, just with the Russian exposure, hasn't that been, largely factored in already, Ricus?
Possibly, but it's still an exposure. And the madness from Russia continues. So I would tend to value that business at zero. I thought they were quite excited when they bought the starch business, when Russia hadn't completely lost the plot, and specifically their expansion into Mongolia, which is a wonderful was a wonderful opportunity as far as resources are concerned, and in effect, then Barlow is selling Mongolia big yellow machines. But with Russia collapsing, the only client that remains is China. So there's still that is still Barlow's growth vector, but it's been severely dented by the madness in Russia. And obviously, the other big part of their business, starch, is struggling at the moment. It's not, it's a highly competitive product, and world prices in starch has been slowing down. So it's a good business, but it's dependent on market cycle as well. As to yesterday's drop, I've got no idea. Downside to about 50 Rand, which will bring them back to where they were in 1991.
And I'm actually looking at that chart, because it really has been on a downward trend since the beginning of the year, since January. So it's really quite interesting. But I mean, at these levels, would you say that it is a value play, or there's just too much uncertainty?
I think not only since the start of the year, but Barlow has been in a downtrend as a result of Russia, as a result of your resource markets slowing down. I don't want to second guess this one. Is highly cyclical. One can make a lot of money out of it, but you've got to be on the right side of the cycle. And obviously, the countries that they operate in must be stable. At the moment, Russia is not, China is weird, and poor Mongolia is sitting right in the middle between these two powers.
All right. Before we get to your stock pick, Ricus, a very interesting one on Pick n Pay, not about the turnaround strategy. Pick n Pay is one of the first to accept Bitcoin in SA, so where you can pay in Bitcoin. It may be small now, but could pay off dividends in the long run. Discuss, please. I don't know how much weight this carries in terms of your view of Pick n Pay as an investment case.
Okay, absolutely zero, because I cannot see what difference a Bitcoin payment would make. I mean, after how many years now, we are back to the fact that apart from your ledger and things like that, there's nothing Bitcoin can do that you can't do in any other way, and possibly cheaper as well, in effect. So whether you pay by credit card or cash or Bitcoin doesn't really matter. Just because a company or a store accepts Bitcoin does not mean everybody with Bitcoin is going to rush there and buy their stuff. It's more about hype, I think, than anything else. And Pick n Pay itself, no ways. I'd rather stick with ShopRite, which is expensive, but it's such a monster at the moment in this market. I don't think anybody can even think about starting to get market share from them. And
you know what you're getting. It's not a box of chocolates. It's not a box of chocolates where you don't know what you're going to get. Ricus, let's get to your stock pick for today. What will it be?
It's Siemens in Germany. We know what they do. It is heavy machinery, first of all, but also, interestingly enough, on the tech side of things, where they're involved in doing some work as far as smart buildings are concerned. Whether it be making your lift run more efficiently or your aircon working better. I think that's it's a nice change in the income stream from your very heavy industrial type of machinery. Plus, there's also been some destocking as a result of basically transport problems over the past few years in some of their clients' warehouses, and I think that's going to lift them as well.
All right, well, thank you so much for your time and for all your analysis today, Ricus. Really appreciate it. That was Ricus Reeders from PSG Hole in One Ruimsig.